NWP Radio.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever you are. Good June. Wow, I can't believe it's June already. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Ripley Crandall from the Connecticut Writing Project. And once again, I'm thrilled to be here with Tanya Baker, Director of National Programs, for another episode of The Right Time. Believe it or not, this is our 24th episode in just over a year. When we pitched the idea of the Penguin Random House and Random House children's books, we never imagined it would take off as well as it did. Then again, where else in the nation is there a show that pairs incredible National Writing Project teachers like Kate Kennedy with incredible writers and memoirists like Abdi Iftin? So Tanya, you know I'm super excited for tonight's show. In fact, I've been counting down the days for this one for months now. So how you doing?
I'm great. And I woke up this morning and said, oh, we're doing The Right Time, which is always my favorite thing. And it's Abdi Iftin. So Brian's going to be out of his mind with excitement. We know that tonight's episode is extra special for you because of all the literacy work you and your teaching teams in Connecticut have done with immigrant and refugee youth. We also know that June 20th is World Refugee Day. And when you said, I wonder if we could get Abdi Iftin to be a special guest in recognition of this celebration, I was like, oh, come on, really? But as usual, you came through and we did, and we are so excited. It's an honor to have the author of Call Me an American with us. But we also have the superpower of teacher Kate Kennedy, and they're both from Maine, my home state. So now I'm all excited about that too. And we're so happy to welcome you both to the show.
Yeah, it is a main event, and I'm going to do a little bit of history about World Refugee on June 20th, and then introduce Abdi Iftin. In 2001, on its 50th anniversary, the United Nations General Assembly declared June 20th as World Refugee Day, a time to honor the strength and courage of refugees worldwide, and to encourage public awareness and support for the rights, the stories, and the plight of people who have fled their homes, neighbors, and lands as a result of violent conflicts or natural disasters. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, refugees are individuals who have been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, violence, well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, membership in a particular social group. Most likely they cannot return home or are afraid to do so. War and ethnic, tribal, and religious violence are leading causes of refugees fleeing their countries. Over the past 3 years, however, 79.5 million individuals have been forcibly displaced from home nations, 26 million as refugees. Half of these individuals are under the age of 18, and the numbers are growing every day. For these reasons, memoirs like Call Me American are important. Abdi Iftin is a naturally gifted speaker. His story, one of 60 Peabody finalists in 2015, has been featured on various radio and television stations, most recently on CNN. Abdi's stories are personal narratives of his life growing up in a country shredded by a civil war and finished off by Islamists, with the sheer luck to win a green card to immigrate to the United States in 2014. As a former refugee, a recent immigrant to the United States, and a Muslim, Abdi has received requests to speak at TEDx events, universities, and colleges in Maine. His new book, Call Me American, was recently adapted in 2018, or was named in 2018 as a finalist for a New England Booksellers Association Book Award. Also ironic, we can actually sing happy birthday to Abdi Iftin because June 20th is also a special day as it is his born day. Delacorte Press, an imprint of Random House Children's Books, adapted his memoir for young adult readers with Max Alexander. And so it's happy book birthday, it's World Refugee Day, it's happy Abdi Iftin birthday, it's an Abdi birthday to you, Abdi birthday to you. Okay, and so I am super excited about having you on the show, and I can't wait for this conversation. And you can introduce Kate for me.
I can. Oh, sorry, that was Abdi's.
There he is. That
should have been up. I'm not so good on the slides. Happy birthday, Abdi. As a gift to you, I reached out to another Mainer who connects Kate and me, Rich Kent, and we asked him who would be the perfect teacher to bring tonight's conversation forward. And I should have known, I should have been able to figure it out myself, but he recommended our shared friend, Kate Kennedy, who is also a Mainer, as we said. So it's a Maine event. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce my friend Kate. She is the author of Skin, a memoir, and a novel, End Over End, 2 editions of short biographies entitled Maine's Remarkable Women, and many short pieces of fiction and nonfiction. For 20 years, Kate taught writing at Portland High School, then was the director of the Southern Maine Writing Project at the University of Southern Maine. She still teaches occasional graduate seminars for the University of Maine. Kate lives in Cape Elizabeth. Important to this story, I think, Kate was also the first person to hold an MA of teaching English as a second language in Maine, which she earned at UCLA in 1972. When she moved to Maine in 1977 from Cambridge, Massachusetts, where she had been the director of a free program for adults in ESL, there was a little call to teach ESL in Maine. But the longer she stayed at Portland High, the more she was able to teach students from around the world, mostly refugees, an experience she describes as delightful. So Kate, obviously, you seemed like the just right interviewer for tonight's show. We are super excited to step out of the way and offer the show to the 2 of you. Kate will ask that you start us off with a writing prompt, and should viewers want, they can hit pause when they're watching and do the writing prompt before they continue on, but we'll just start by introducing it.
Well, thank you. This is wonderful. Abdi, I'm so delighted to meet you. That we're fellow Mainers, and we live probably, 40 miles apart, but we've yet to meet. For this prompt, think of a time in your own life when you suddenly saw someone well known to you in a new and perhaps more realistic light. And this is based on a number of times Abdi told us about experiences in his growing up years when his attitude toward someone close to him, someone in his life, changed, was transformed. And I think this is something that we share maybe around the world, that as we grow up, our attitudes toward people change, they mature. Some of these are painful, some of these are really illuminating. So I'll leave it at that.
Good prompt.
Awesome. And we will leave you to your conversation. We'll see you back in a little bit.
Abdi, I feel as if we are kind of meeting over a cup of tea somewhere. We can imagine, can't we? Right? That's what writers do.
Okay, well, yes, you mentioned that we both are Mainers. Not only that, there's something else that actually brings us closer together, which is that we are both writers. And I've actually been on several Zoom calls over the past 15 months, and I have not had one like the one we had with Brian and Tanya. They brought so much energy into this. I could say I was a little bored when I got on this Zoom call about 15-20 minutes ago. I'm fired up. So I'm really looking forward to having this awesome conversation with you, Kate. So
writers like to talk. We'll talk a little shop talk. The prompt asks us to think about adults, particularly in our lives, who we look at one way, and then as we get older and our viewpoint maybe broadens or certainly changes, we change that, we adapt it, our relationships evolve. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about how your relationship to America, what you thought about before you came, and then when you came here to Maine, how that changed. I'm sure it must have, but I would love to hear what you have to say.
So, Kate, to respond to that really good question, one thing I can say is I miss the feelings that I used to have for America. You know, there was this incredibly sort of burning desire, you know, in the person, and this is what I felt. in Somalia. The fact that I was facing a challenge, and to overcome that challenge and to reach the goals and ambitions where I felt like one day landing on an American soil, right? Stepping out of an airplane, waving to America, getting that strong smell of America, the first side of America, right? Those were these incredibly moving sort of feelings inside me, and even when I was in Kenya. Now, those have all evaporated. They don't exist anymore, right? Because I'm living in it, and also, unfortunately, I would say the times that I have spent in this country have not been easy times. The first evening that I landed, for those who remember the history, this was August 11th, and Ferguson, Missouri was on fire. Angry Americans were burning, vehicles and facing police because the police have brutally murdered an 18-year-old young African American by the name Michael Brown. And there I was. I was in Logan Airport, and I haven't slept for the last 21 hours of the flight, and I was very, very excited. And I basically mentioned this in the book as well. My eyes were glued on the screen, and as we flew over the Atlantic Ocean, I was expecting that first light of America coming into sight, and then it did. Slowly, sort of like zoomed in, and this was Boston. And the first time I saw a car moving, because that's the first thing you see. You don't see humans first, right? The streets and everything else. This was amazing. But on the other side, there were Americans who were hurt and going through this trauma, and the beginning of Black Lives Matter, because Black folks were not only incarcerated, but also chased after and sort of like murdered. And I think I haven't really absorbed everything at the moment. But to give you a short answer, when I look at it right now, I see everything that I felt in the past to be a sort of a distant memory that comes back to me, not quite often, but sometimes. There are times where I would be walking through the woods, and out of nowhere, all of a sudden, that amazing feeling of the beauty of this country, the amazement, right? The opportunities, the magnificent possibilities that this country provides, sort of like come to me. And then I try to actually grapple on that moment, not let it go. See, I want this. I'm traumatized every single day. I'm worried of so many things in the news, conversation with friends, all the activism work that we do, everything that we do these days is just fear. Fear because the system has created fear, right? And so that America that existed, in my mind, no longer exists. So it just only comes to me sort of like a dream, even though I'm actually living in America. But that happens to look more like a dream that has only existed in the past, but is now coming back to visit me. And when it comes to me, I really want to hug it and hold it tight and keep it to me and say, I want that. I want that feeling. I want the feeling of seeing America as a place of possibilities, not as a place where I could get murdered, right? And it's just myself, I'm in the woods. So in other words, I'm hoping that someday this country becomes the country where other refugees who are currently living in Egypt, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, on and on and on, that they start dreaming about this country as much as I have dreamed about it. Because there's something amazing with it. It takes you into such a journey. In fact, it sometimes saves you your own life. For example, I think if I hadn't really put much efforts into learning English and wanting to live in America, I could become member of a gang in Somalia. That was an easy entrance, right? It existed. There was that opportunity, and I could have taken that up. The reason I did not do that was because I had this dream of going and living in this sort of like a fictional place called America. Fictional. I'm saying fictional because it doesn't look like what I really
No.
had imagined.
Well, you're not alone in that. So many of us who have lived our whole lives here feel that way, that it's been quite heartbreaking, I have to say, and discouraging. And more people want to come here. They don't necessarily even want to come here, but they have to go somewhere. And the pathway here sometimes is easier than other places. We've become very close and sort of unofficially adopted a family from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And their story of fleeing after terrible atrocities, fleeing for their lives with a small child. And they say, we didn't want to come here. This was not our dream. But they're happy to be safe here. They feel more or less safe, although what's going on with our racial injustice, terrible history of that is bewildering to them. They're still in that kind of a transition phase. So you've somehow, what it sounds like to me, Abdi, is not only was it a life-changing dream, you moved from being a young man, quite a young man, a child really, and then you grew up. And so there's that feeling of what happens when you mature and you see a more rounded picture of people and of life. But I join you in feeling that we have to work so hard to change and make that dream come alive again. I'm sorry that I can relate to what you're saying. Of course, I don't live it the way you do, but.
Absolutely. I think at the end of the day, what we all want is to live in peace more than living in prosperity and becoming wealthy. I don't think that's anything that anybody that I know from Somalia is actually thinking about, right? And like you said, growing up is such an amazing experience because you grow up to feel more empowered in some ways, but also more responsible and feeling the weight of the responsibilities that lay ahead of you, or with you. So over the years, I have basically taken an oath to support my family no matter where they are. And that has been a long-time decision of mine from age 7, because with everything else that we went through, I would say one positive thing that came out of my childhood life, despite the horror stories, the death and destruction and displacement, the bondage that happened between and within my family, the relationship between myself and my brother, which is rock solid, the relationship between my mother and myself, which is rock solid, the relationship between the three of us, a triangle relationship. And in the middle sits my other sister, Nima, who's made it, is living, has 5 kids. So, and I think it is what actually makes me a better human most of the times. And every time that I haven't seen them for 13 years, I'm talking about my mom and my sister. So as hard as that feels, when in America, we have emotional footage sometimes where a military serving in Iraq comes back after 2 years and pops up in a surprise Thanksgiving appearance, and we see all the tears on families' eyes. Those kind of footage make me cry. Make me cry because I can understand what actually a family reunion, would feel like. So what I'm trying to say here is, I am not expecting to get my family here in the US. That actually should not be the only choice. And you said, Kate, in your earlier, the kids that you have adopted, they were not interested in coming to the United States. My mother is exactly the same. I mean, she said, if I find peace in Somalia, that's my heaven.
Right.
Right. Where home is wherever you feel safe.
Right.
And participant in whatever, is out there. She's not safe and she's not participant. They're not voting. I mean, it's a country that's still going through a war, but she's not complaining at all. She says, we're fine. You're sending us money. We have roof over our heads. We have food on our table. And I think, and my story is slightly different because I was always rebellious and crazy and dreaming big and wanting things that I can't even afford, which I think at the end of the day, my mom wins because I remember keeping telling her that life in the US is a lot better and, everything would be fine. Not really, right? I mean, yeah, I'm working. That's the better side of being here and being able to provide for them. But at the end of the day, she's actually the winner, and I've given that up to her. So I'm not rebellious anymore, and I actually am very consultative with her in issues related to our family and other things, and I'm really feeling great with that. So it's amazing to be grown up, to become a certain age where you feel some things that I have done in the past are actually quite not acceptable, but I have done it anyways. And then some of the things that I have done in the past, that there are a lot of them that I'm very proud of. And it actually includes my determination and insisting on things that I envision and I wanted. But then again, there are other things where I feel I was too childish. I was not really. I haven't. If there's any lesson that I have to learn is to number one, not assume that everything that glitters is gold. There's that expression. So, and now going back again, being refugee and we're all hustling to get here, mostly because we're running away from persecution. We're running away from other troubles, piles of issues that you can mention. You won't escape those things here as well. They do come with you as long as you're on planet Earth. So there's no dead end. There's no, this is the time you can relax, you can sit. So it's a journey, it continues. So as we not only publish memoirs and other books, but I think the journey is on and it continues, and that is how I live my life. I live my life more like a pencil, which keeps writing and writing and writing. If the pages are done, the book is done, you go to the next one, which is always available, and you keep writing. And that's how, I see life. It's continuous until you can no longer do that.
I wanted to ask you a particular writer's question. Your first sentence in the book, Abdi, I need to read it here. I was born under a neem, is that it? Neem tree?
Correct. Neem tree, yep.
I was born under a neem tree, probably in 1985. Bang, right off the start, you present to certainly a Western audience who's not particularly well informed about Somalia, a tree we've never heard of, and you're not sure what year you were born, which are to many Americans surprising. But then you go, clever writer, you go on and you explain just enough so you can keep telling your story. And I was very impressed with that ability, that because the complex, complicated history of Somalia, the clans, the civil war, the Islamists, I mean, on and on, there's so much that would be confusing and wouldn't mean so much in your telling us, except that you set a context. And I wondered if you could spill the beans on that a little bit. Tell us a little more.
Okay, number one, I wanted to, in that particular part of the story where you read, I wanted to humanize the story that I was going to tell. In fact, most of the Somali stories are not humanized. I mean, look at Hollywood has made a couple movies about Somalia,
Right.
and it's about Americans, the heroes, going down, shooting at, or going into a fight with the warlords and escaping. And the pictures that you see, it's a bunch of people running around with an AK-47. When they speak, the words that come out of the Somalis is anger, frustration, I will kill you, I will murder you, I will do this, I will do that, right?
Right.
So with that, I think the general audience, whether they're Americans or Europeans or others who have followed Somalia's stories by the paper, as well as by the screen, they have actually walked away with some sort of a story where they are not even interested in understanding the human stories. Are these people born? If they are, what does it look like? Do they get married? Do they work? Those kind of things. And that is where I wanted to sort of like strike right at the beginning. Hey, I wasn't actually born in a hospital. I was born probably 1985, right? And then as you read through that story, you sort of like come to realize that, oh, interesting. The husband actually sort of like clears the house. He's not there. He lets his wife hang out with the ladies. They come together. This is all this perfume, awesome, amazing smelly stuff that they do with the baby, and they celebrate together. Whereas the men celebrate together, and it's such a sort of like a connected, in some ways, sort of like family affair, where where snacks are involved, parties are involved, but it not necessarily the way we do here. We're not talking about the husband holding the baby, stuff like that. It's different, but that's our story. You don't have to hate it for us, right? That's a human story that does exist. And then we come out, I grew up, I have all kinds of things, and my dad is very supportive. My mom is very supportive. They worked hard to build that life. Then things happen. We lose almost everything except our own lives, right? We lost our house. My mom lost her jewelry. My dad lost his job, and we're fleeing. We're walking down the road. So what is the other story that I want the audience to follow? I want them to follow the strength and resilience of these families. This mother is not giving up. She's heavily pregnant. She's holding one of her babies, and she's carrying one on her back, and one is trailing behind her, right? And she's taking them from the city to the wilderness, to the small towns, and circling back, coming back to the city and sleeping with them on the side of the road, on top of the graves, and telling them stories that would send them to sleep with an empty belly, right? And when people read those stories, I want them to understand that, yes, there's a war, there's conflict, there's death, but underneath, there's a human story. People can get caught up in these situations, but we also need to uncover those stories that nobody ever talks about. So I'm not really writing this book to talk about what the militias look like and who's fighting who, more like, what you might read on a long piece on New York Times Sunday morning, right? When they talk about, oh, there's a war in Somalia, so let's talk about who's fighting who. That was not basically what I was actually, interested. I'm someone who was born into this culture, and I think the feedback that I receive from predominantly people who read the book is just how amazing I've really portrayed these individual stories: a mother, the father, the kids, the sister, the bondage, the brother is coming together and becoming supportive of their families. So Kate, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I thought I lose track of what I was asked. So
Yeah. Another writing question: were there parts of this book that were relatively easy to write? Now that's maybe laughable because writing is difficult, but sometimes there's a flow to it. And then other times it's at least that's how it is for me. And I wanted to ask you about that in your own work.
correct. Well, let's see. There are, I wouldn't say easier, but there, it's a memoir, of course. The better your memories are, the better you can write on those things. I would, Kate, I would actually say most of my stories before America are pretty much eventful, right? I mean, one day I get handcuffed by the police. The next day, again, I get handcuffed by a different police. And then the third day, they were knocking at the door and I ignored it. So how do you forget those eventful days? Even if you don't really take notes of them, which I actually did, because I was emailing back and forth with all the journalists, everything that happened. So it was more of I had more stories than what I wanted to tell. I mean, too much of them that the journalists I was sharing with them weren't even quite sure which area to pick. So from chapter 14 and up, it was actually a lot easier for me to basically go back on my Gmail and choose 2015 or 2014 or 2012, 2011, and go through all the emails and pick all the pictures that I sent / the long email that followed with it, which I detailed some of those events. So I gathered those and put them together. And one thing else that made it a lot easier was This American Life is a national podcast. Pretty much many Americans actually listen to it. I did a documentary with them when I was still in Kenya. And that documentary is entirely based on winning the green card lottery, which is how I got here, up until a 12 months process. So we documented almost everything that happened in between, going to the U.S. Embassy, being rejected and going back and rejected again and going to the police station and almost got arrested. I mean, all these eventful things. So I really, really, really thought that was so exciting for me to sort of like see the story right in front of me. And all I needed was to put that into a book, sort of like move it and put it into a book. So that was very helpful. Can I talk about the most challenging part of the book?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, of course, childhood stories are really challenging. You can't remember a lot. And I needed the help of my mother in that. So she worked with me really a lot on from chapter number 1 up to 6 and 7. And she was crying quite often because she didn't understand why I was insisting on going back to the terrifying stories. I mean, I wanted my mom to talk about the day that we lost my own sister from malnutrition, for example. And my mother thought that we buried my sister and the story. We did not. It's our family tradition. We did not really want to talk about that because it's painful. It's, it hurts all of us when we talk about it. But then when I started writing, I realized, no, I have to break this tradition in my family, which includes I have to really talk to my mother about the death that happened in our family, the separation of family, the terrifying moments that we had in our family. And she's still in Somalia, so it doesn't help at all, right? She still lives through that. I don't. I left 13 years ago, and here I am. I could be sitting in a Starbucks when it's snowing outside and be able to work on my piece and asking my mother and all those stories. To her, felt like a little bit of betrayal of our family values. But I had to come up with all the excuses to explain to her that this is extremely important, that we need to tell this story to the rest of the world. So that was really challenging. And I did not want to see my mother cry. So I made her cry. I made her cry by asking tough questions. And I hung up a lot because I could not hear that. I could not hear my mother sobbing or crying. It was very painful. So that was very challenging as well.
I would say so. I think a memoir in some ways asks us to confront things that are very difficult, very painful, and often there can be a problem in a family caused by a memoir. There can be a rupture of some sort, but it sounds like you all, your mother accepted what you were doing and loved you, and she gave what she could.
She did, and I was very proud
That
to do that.
that comes across so often. You write how proud you are of her, how strong she is, what a pillar of strength and faith. She's an amazing person in this book. She really is, as is pretty much everybody. Even the man who beat you at the madrasa was came across as a fascinating person. You mentioned really toward the end of the book that you would like to return to Somalia someday and run for president, but not as a member of your clan, but as a Somali American. I wondered if you could speak a little about that, if you're willing.
So, Kate, I mentioned that mostly because, of course, there is the human desire to own power exists almost in every community. And not only Somalia, it does, not only also the United States, I mean, it does exist. The smallest towns that you go, I mean, humans are, there's always that part that's more dominant than the other. So even though we're actually the most homogenous society in East Africa, people who speak the same language, same faith, as far as I can remember, 10 million Somalis worship the same God. And that's all we have, right? And we have the same skin color, but we're actually divided by clan lines. And so there is a system of governance as we speak today in Somalia, and that system of governance disqualifies certain communities within certain tribes or clan within the Somalis. And my clan is one of those that are disqualified to not even be able to run for president, right? You can't because you're not powerful. That is what we have. So when I wrote that part of the book, I sort of like led the audience into like understanding the Somali clan lines, the Daro, the Hawiye. We talked about the Somali Bantu, which are also at the bottom. Nobody will give them even a member of parliament because they're considered not even acceptable, in those societies. Mm-hmm. So what I was aiming at in that particular part of my story is to say it's about time, right? It's about time. It's about, in America, it was about time to have a Black president. It's about time to have a Black female vice president. I mean, we're see those interesting things. It does exist in Somalia. So, and I said, well, listen, I would like to be the first Rahan Wayne, which is my clan, Rahan Wayne, Somali president, Rahan Wayne, president in Somalia. But wait, actually, that's not what I want to use. I'm not interested in going back to the clan names, right? I don't want my clan to start running around and saying, oh, he's the first Rahan Wayne president. That's not what I'm interested in. What I actually want is to dismantle this clan system that basically discriminates its own people. So why don't I run as a Somali American, someone who's educated here, of course is a US citizen, but also wants to go back and to say, hey, I've actually learned a way to fight sort of discrimination, create activism and sort of like bring people together. And that's something that I've learned when I was in the United States. But why don't we bring that here? Let's just put down the gun and pick up the pen. And let's start writing, not only writing, let's start fighting through other means. You can get to power no matter what clan you belong to, but let's consider merits based on your level of, understanding of how you want to run Somalia, and let's just make this more public than having clan run around and bringing someone that they like or desire, not based on because of their understanding of the history of Somalia, But just because he belongs to this clan and he's a powerful, a big mouth and someone who really speaks up for this clan and stuff like that, that's what we have right now. So that's what I was aiming, and I really wanted the Somali readers particularly to get to that point and sort of like understand what I was talking about and create a conversation in this community. And I think luckily it's actually started. Few people are talking about these issues and sort of like coming together, and we're trying to dismantle that system that exists out there here so that someday there's a lot of us here. Now we're nearly 1 million. And we're, believe it or not, we're actually the #1 source of income for everybody who lives in Somalia now. So we're sending money back home, and that is what our families are surviving on. So we have the power. We actually have the power.
Well, thank you. Wow. I wanted to ask you to read a little bit of your book, Abdi, but I have this issue of it, which is maybe the original, not the one adapted for younger readers. But do you have a copy of that?
I do.
Okay. Well, it's in your epilogue, and it's on page 307.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts, but radical Muslims do not represent Islam. Could you read that paragraph?
Sure. Yeah. But radical Muslims do not represent Islam, nor do they represent the hopes and dreams of the Somali people. You can pray to Allah 5 times a day and still hold hands at the, you can still hold hands at the movies. This I know. I know it's possible to save your camel milk and democracy, to chase tic-tics across the bush and stop at the red lights, to proudly name your nomadic ancestors and dance to hip hop at your own wedding. These are not contradictions or abominations, but reflections of our own universal humanity and, yes, our shrinking world. How else to explain an African boy's love of the Terminator movies, or African drumming classes being taught in American high schools?
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for reading that. I couldn't wait to hear it in your own voice. It's just great. You said you learned English by watching American movies, and you were so beamed in on that. You were an incredibly focused young man, and I'm sensing as a grown-up on learning that language. You saw it as a way to fulfill your dream, was learning English, and you did it in a kid's way. You know, you loved Terminator, and at the end of your, see, I'm bouncing up and down with excitement. You said that the Terminator character what was in fact struggled in his own life. The actor person struggled in his life, and that was, I found that very moving, that you felt that connection, and you seem in your writing and in your person to make connections across boundaries, traditional boundaries, and I admire that and feel a lot of hope in that attitude, and wanted to thank you for it. And now I want to ask you what you're wound up about these days, Abdi.
Well, Kate, I just finished writing my next book.
Oh, you did?
Well, I mean, what else do you do during COVID, right? It's
right.
We're all, and especially in the wintertime, you know, we're sitting by the fire and bringing a cup of coffee or tea. Right. It is, there are, so, you know, what am I fired up? So there are a few things that have happened ever since Call Me American was published. The two major things that happened that do not include in the book are that my brother Hassan has come to Toronto, Canada. So he's moved with his family, and there's a lot that has happened to get him there. There's a lot of, lots of hands that came together, held tight, trusted each other, and I'm really excited to get that story out there. It's like it's like, how do you get someone out into the world that they want to live in? And the second thing was, when I published my memoir, Holy American, I actually was not a US citizen. I was a green card holder. In other words, I was a permanent resident. And so the process of becoming a United States citizen has actually happened right after the book was published. And I've only taken the oath of naturalization in January 2020, before the virus hit. So I have a whole lot to say about that as well in this new book. And then, there are, and you probably know this, Kate, as being an author, you learn a lot from your readers. Your readers get some sort of an interesting take out of your story. And when you have a chat with them, they really remind you of what your next project should be. And I have come across hundreds of these examples. I traveled as far as Arizona and Oregon, people who have read my memoir, and I enjoyed every minute of it. During the presentation, yes, but also that little tea conversation, or maybe dinner, where you get to hang out with some of the people who write the book. I learned so much, and I kept taking mental note every time someone said something. And so the two things that these people have actually reminded me, some of them are asking, how can I help a new American, an immigrant, a refugee? What can I do? So that's a big question. And it kept me thinking, what actually can one do? And once I thought I at least had some answers, I poured them down in the book. And then the other thing that comes is, what are the expectations of those who are coming here? What are the challenges that you face? And I'll give you one quick example. When I came to Maine 6 years ago, Kate, this was interesting, and I was having dinner with my family, the new family that adopted me into Yarmouth, Maine. I couldn't think. After 20 minutes of the conversation, I was exhausted. I felt like I run out of English, and I wanted to just run upstairs and lay in bed and look up in the ceiling. And you have adopted some kids. You probably know the struggle, the psychological journey that we go through into the new culture and the new area. And so I was worried that I was actually going to traumatize myself. I mean, yeah, it's a white state, it's a small town. There aren't many things to do in Yarmouth, Maine, unless if you don't have a car, you're basically deprived of all the opportunities. Like, you can't go to work, you can't do this and that. So I was trapped. I felt like trapped. I kept walking back and forth in the street 10, 20 times a day. Or I could just walk up to the river. And I became this person who kept waiting for his documents to arrive for the first month. And it was the most boring thing, basically being here. And so, those things have actually also helped me to give the bigger message to those who will eventually migrate to the United States. In other words, a guide to the future Americans that are coming here.
We're coming back in. Tanya and I have been texting throughout your conversation, and it's not an episode of The Right Time until Tanya Baker says, "Okay, I'm crying now. I'm crying now." and actually, I have to say, I started crying at the same place, and Abdi, was when you were honoring your mother, and Kate was recognizing the love too. And there's a mother that I worked very closely with in Syracuse, Makabe Ability, Abu and Lucini's mom. And I always say, like, there's always Mother's Day, and there's women's awards, and like national awards for like these outstanding women who achieve things. And this Makabe Ability, a Liberian American mother, knowing what she still does for her sons and daughters and husband, what she does for her country, what she does for the United States. I don't think I know a more miraculous mother. you know, and I'm giving her a recognition right here, in the way that you were able to recognize your mother through writing. Because when I look at people to look up to for hope and spirit and strength and intelligence, I think about what their mother did to keep them alive and still keep a smile on their face and still find a way to dance and to sing. And it's phew, yeah. So Tanya, how you doing?
I'm fine now. You don't have to tell everybody every time I tell you I cry. I'm going to put the slides back up so Kate can take us out on a writing prompt, but I want to say it was particularly lovely to listen to an interview between two writers, and the writerly way that Kate approached the book and then approached this opportunity to talk to Abdi was really enjoyable. So I appreciate that. Try to share my screen again.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed talking to you and look forward to meeting you live.
Okay, we should do that. We're Mainers.
I know. Hey, let's do it. Okay, I'm supposed to take us out with a writing prompt. Abdi has recreated the real world of his tumultuous growing up time in Somalia, his luck and grit in coming to America, and the ways he has persevered. He doesn't spare us the horrific violence, the losses and tragedies, the dislocation. But there is also much love and curiosity and good luck in this book. I think Call Me American gives us the real world as he experienced it, even though in a book you can't totally recreate things, but you did a wonderful job. So as a prompt, think about your own real world, not the glossy surface we usually skate over, but the rawer, truer reality beneath the surface. You might start with these words: the real world goes like this. And there's down below this slide, there's a little, I want to give credit to the author of those words, who his name is James Galvin, and the book that he wrote is called The Meadow. And this is his very first sentence of his book. It's a novel. The real world goes like this: the never summer mountains like a jumble of broken glass, snowfields weep slowly down. Chambers Lake, ringed by trees, gratefully catches the drip in its tin cup and gives the mountains their own reflection in return. This is the real world, indifferent, unburdened.
That is gorgeous, Kate. And I'm actually thinking of the prompt, and I can't wax poetically in the beautiful language of that writer. But I was thinking in the last question that you asked Abdi, the real world goes like this: you have a responsibility to speak out. And that was the title of a poem that a Somali young man gave me in my own research. And when at one point I was feeling a tremendous responsibility of hearing all the history and not knowing how to tell the story in our culture, the Western culture of academic language, when it came from a kid who was just orally telling me. And he told me, you have a responsibility to speak out. I have a responsibility to tell you my story. You have a responsibility to share it with people in Western society so they know Somalians, so they know we exist, so they embrace history. The real world goes like this when you have a responsibility to speak out. So that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you, Brian. As you know, we always close the show by saying thank you. Thank you, Abdi. Thank you, Kate. It was really wonderful to listen to your conversation today. I also want to thank listeners who are tuned in, or viewers. We want to remind everybody that we have a lot of these Right Time shows, and we would love for you to join us. And if you want to know when the next one's coming, you can follow us at National Writing Project on Twitter or on Instagram. You can join our Facebook community if you're an educator who wants to talk to other educators. You can visit nwp.org, where you could sign up for our newsletter and get a monthly update so you know when the next show is coming. And before we close, Abdi, I'm going to give you a little advice, because I've been thinking about this. in the very near end of that half a year of winter in Maine, when you think spring will never come again, just write to Kate and say, Kate, can you write me one paragraph about what's going to happen next month? Because when I used to work regularly with Kate in writing project work, she would send me these notes that would be about like, I'd have to write this report. But before I tell you about the report, I want to tell you about the birds who just started singing in my backyard. She is the greatest documenter of Maine spring that I know. So now you're connected and she can provide that for you.
Desperately seeking Maine spring.
Yeah. Oh, Kate, well, I would love, yeah, that's right. Kate, I'm not really very good at naming birds in Maine. They keep coming up, and it's actually this year that I learned the robins because they were nesting.
That's good. That's a start.
There you go. So I will need your support on that, building up the Maine culture.
Okay, well, we will get together. Thank you, Tanya and Brian, for bringing us together and making this happen. It was so great to be with you tonight. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
You're listening to NWP Radio, a production of the National Writing Project.
NWP. NWP Radio.